Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby. I am utterly delighted today to be joined by a dear friend, Mr. Simon Hartley. Simon, how are you?
Very well indeed. Thank you very much. All good.
Good. Well, listen, Simon is an author, a high performance expert, a culture expert, a psychologist, you name it, he's done it. Been massively busy through the lockdown, helping companies all over the country, all over the world, in fact, survive these most curious of times. Simon, for those who haven't read your stuff or seen too much about you so far, give us a quick synopsis of who you are.
Yeah, sure. So my background, as you said, is sports psychology. For the first, probably 10 years or so of my career, I was working exclusively in sport with sports teams and athletes, helping them get their mental game right, individually and collectively. So working with individuals and working with teams and organizations. But more recently, I've applied what I call the same stuff to a different audience. So to me, it's still really sports psychology, or what I used to call sports psychology. But I help businesses, charity, education, healthcare, done some work in the military, help them adopt the same sorts of mindsets. And my real interest and passion, as you know, over many, many years has been to understand what differentiates the world's best, what sets them apart, how they think differently, what they do differently, how they respond differently to challenges, and then help people adopt those principles into their own performance so that they can, seriously elevate their performance.
I think that's the key thing for me about how transferable all of this is. Look, this is a show for fintech professionals, as you know. But I think everything you talk about, be it a the Yorkshire cricket team or a exchange or vendor or service provider in the fintech space, everyone goes through the same sort of challenges. And right now, providing as much help as we possibly can to people who are going through things and trying to maintain the sort of performance of their team, the spirit of their team is important. And I think the glue that holds all that together so often is that magic word culture. So important. And that's what we're going to be focusing in over the next half hour or so in this discussion with you. Culture, I know, is something you studied from racing car teams all the way through to sports teams, through to businesses, and you've had a massive impact on the culture of our business at Harrington Starr. Where to begin? Look, character, I know, is a big thing which you focus in on, and getting the right characters around your team to create that culture. Give us a little bit of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's an understanding that I've come to over the course of many years, but actually one that I think the All Blacks rugby team, I know you've been chatting to James Kerr, the All Blacks really understand, and they communicate that with real simplicity, because the way that they describe is that culture is collective character, really. And actually, I kind of see character almost as individualized culture. And if you think about how that plays out, really, I describe character as the outward expression of who I am. So it's the way I live, my personal values, my beliefs, my philosophy, etc. So actually, if you expand that to a collective group, then our culture is the way that we live our values and beliefs and philosophy, etc. So when I was talking to business leaders this morning about what you actually want to see and hear from your people, how you want them to think, how you want them to feel, what you want them to say and do on a daily basis. And really that kind of encapsulates culture. And if we understand the power that has on our performance, the impact that has over our performance, really, what people say and do on a daily basis and how they think and feel is the essence, that foundation of how we perform. So getting this right is critical within an organization, whether they be a business or a sports team or whatever. Getting this critical within an organization or getting it embedded within an organization is critical.
So culture is a really interesting thing at the moment, isn't it? Because look, every business goes into a scenario where things are unprecedented and it's splintered. You've got splintered teams who are all used to working together. It's a nerve. I was speaking to someone last night who said, your culture is so important of having everyone together, but then all of a sudden we're fragmented and we're not together. And in the future, I think the workplace will look very different, and you have people who are much more spread around and such like. If culture is about the location, in that argument, how do we deal with that? Or building a culture, should we say, is about the location. With people being fragmented, how do we still do that? How do we get around that issue?
Yeah, well, fundamentally, I don't think culture is location orientated. I mean, lots of people have probably seen it that way because that's the only way they've known it. You know, we come into the same space, we might even decorate that space in a certain way, and we'll put lots of sayings up on the walls, and, you know, we'll make it look and feel like our space. And that's one way that we might be able to start embedding a culture, but it's not the only way. And if we start to pull it back to its core, really this is about getting people who care, getting the right people, the people with the right character, who really care about what we do, and care about doing it together with us and doing it really well because it's important. And the way that we do it, we've got a common understanding that the values we need to adopt and the way that we do it is similar amongst us all. And if we've got that, we've got the essence of building a great culture. And it's not location dependent. Honestly, I mean, I've built, with organizations and teams of our own, I've built remote working teams, some of whom, you know, these people have never met each other, or they may have met each other once. And they're spread across Europe in some cases, or some of the global teams that we built, you know, were spread across the world. So they didn't even share the same time zone, never mind the same space. And for some of them, English wasn't their first language. And yet we still pulled them together as a strong team and created a culture around them. Because we were working with those fundamental pieces of character and purpose and values, and having the right people who really care about what we do.
And do you still see them play for the shirt and that to that same degree? Do you still see them sort of there and as passionate about that sort of brand which they're not physically a part of as they would be remotely?
Yeah, again, if you bring it back to its essence, this is largely about feeling proud to belong. Belonging here, feeling proud of what we do. What we do is important. We're really, really good at this. When we do this well, we all get a massive sense of satisfaction. Whether I'm in the same room with these people or not, I still enjoy working with them, and I'm proud to belong to this team because it's a great team to be part of. And when we do all of that, we get real rewards, some of which are sort of pound, shillings and pence rewards, and some aren't. But we get really a real sense of reward from it. So when we build that, again, it's not dependent on a location. This is human stuff. And honestly, I mean, you know, I use the word sports psychology a lot, but the truth is about sports psychology, it's human psychology. And that's why it applies equally to lawyers, to fintech professionals, to recruitment professionals. You know, it doesn't matter, doctors, surgeons, whatever. So this is human stuff, and if we get to that core understanding of what builds a culture around human beings, what are the ingredients that we need, they're not dependent on location. It's the same when we get challenges in teams when they're working remotely. Most of those challenges are not challenges of remoteness. If we've got motivational challenges, that's not a remoteness issue, it's a motivational issue. If we've got engagement issues, they're not remoteness issues, they're engagement issues. If we've got trust issues, they're trust issues. And we're not going to solve that literally just by putting people back into the same room, because the problem was, and this is what people have experienced through COVID particularly, we didn't get those things right. We sort of papered over the cracks, and we made do because we were in the same space at the same time. And then when we took it to a remote working environment, it didn't stand up. But it wasn't an issue of remoteness. The fact is we didn't have trust and engagement and motivation and all those sorts of things. They weren't built in. And often that's because we didn't get the purpose right, the values right, the culture right in the first place.
I think it's really interesting this, you talk there about engagement and motivation, two of the things that have probably been some of the most difficult things for leaders to really, really work hard on all the way through this. There's been sort of 13, 14 weeks of people where their teams have been, you know, locked into houses on their own at various different stages. There's been concerns and fears about loved ones, family, themselves, all this sort of stuff. There's been people who are finding their jobs twice as difficult. You know, they're working twice as hard for half as much. These are all things that sort of in many ways sap motivation for a number of people. They're things that in many ways create everything you're talking there about not being quite perfect suddenly get petrol poured on them at this sort of stage, right? So you've got all of these different moving parts around all of this, and it's a challenge for every leader out there to sort of keep that culture, with all of that sort of additional stuff which no one's ever dealt with or had to deal with in such such bizarre circumstances at any sort of stage. Have you seen people really navigate that well? Because if we've spoken for years and years, Simon and I have worked with each other for a long time now. You and I have worked with each other for a long time now. And control the controllables has been a sort of key phrase of everything we've ever spoken about. At the moment, there's never been more uncontrollables that are thrown at us. Tell us a little bit about what you've seen there and the advice you can give on that.
Yeah, so as you said, hairline cracks become chasms when people are working remotely. So if we didn't really have a strong team and we didn't have a strong sense of belonging, that's just going to get amplified. If we didn't really have a solid base for motivation, if our motivation was too kind of one-dimensional, that's going to get amplified. So yeah, it's really a case of looking back at the fundamentals again of how we build teams, how we lead people. I think one of the big missing pieces, honestly, is that leaders did not really focus on purpose. They focused on goals, they focused on targets, sometimes strategy, but not really purpose. So they didn't have people who really genuinely cared about what they were doing. I was talking to some legal leaders yesterday. So all of these guys essentially run law firms. They probably founded law firms. And interestingly, some of them were saying, we've had no issues working remotely, really. It's been fairly smooth. I mean, we had a couple of technical issues, but in terms of performance and the engagement of the team and all the rest of it, no real issues. And others have been saying, it's been a bloody nightmare. And the quicker we can get back into the office, the better. And then you start looking at why, because it's not the size of the business that's dictated it. They're all in the same sector. They're not doing vastly different things. And one of those leaders says, we spent a long time making sure we recruited the right people. And we really knew the kind of person that we were trying to recruit. And we absolutely did recruit on character. And actually, we haven't had any problems, really. People have been motivated, they're self-starters. We haven't had to micromanage them. We never did. They're self-reliant people. So actually, they haven't found it very difficult. And we've got other people saying it's been an absolute nightmare. And really, we didn't recruit the right kind of people in the first place. So we didn't get the character bit right in the first place. We didn't have people who were resilient. They weren't self-starters and they weren't self-dependent, self-reliant people. So we've really struggled when they're in a remote working setting. And equally, they probably didn't really care about what we did. So, I mean, if you sort of reflect back on the fact that culture's collective character and vice versa, one of those issues with character is that you see the real character of somebody when you're not watching them. What do they do when you're not watching them? Or what do they do when they're not being watched or they don't think they're being watched? What's that sort of that place that they come back to? And for some people, it's been, if you're not watching me, I won't do anything. For other people, if you're not watching, I still really care about the client. I care about the work. I care about doing a great job. It doesn't matter whether you're watching me or not. I'm going to do that anyway. And if you think about multiplying that out across your business and the impact it has, if you've got lots of people, so character becomes collective, character becomes culture. If you magnify that out or multiply it out, and you've got lots of people who don't really care, who, if you're not watching, won't do it, don't really care about the client or the quality of the work, etc., you're going to get a very, very different business, a very different performance as an organization compared to one where you've filled that organization full of people who genuinely do care about doing a great job.
I think that's so interesting, isn't it? This and obviously being my world, the recruitment world, it's so important to do that, and I think it's particularly interesting in the financial technology space, right? Because this is where skill sets are so important. And you're not only looking for the character, but you're looking for people who can do highly complex tasks at the same sort of stage, of which there is a war for talent. And there are people there who are maverick developers and people there who have super skill sets, but might not necessarily be culturally aligned to what they want to do. I can think of 2 or 3 companies who absolutely excelled through this period in the fintech space. And one of the things I know that they are super focused in on is making sure that they absolutely hire for values alongside that as well. And they are so keen to they won't just be looking. They'll do one of two things. They'll either turn up or turn away top talent because it's top talent who isn't right for their organization, or they would invest in what we would call people who are ready to move into that sort of position. So they might not be quite as highly skilled as someone else who's going for the job, but absolutely their attitude is. And the talent triangle we always talk about is about moving people into that and hiring for people who can move into the job but be much better for your organization. And that becomes so key, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of those massive opportunities through this period for leaders, because what happens when human beings are put into extreme challenges, that you tend to see polarization. So you see some people who do extremely well and some people who really struggle. And how people respond to these challenges gives you a really sharp view on their character. There is an enormous opportunity for leaders through this period to learn a lot about their people.
Yeah, never waste a good recession.
And actually, you start to learn, if you were thinking about succession planning, who are likely to be our future leaders? What are we seeing in these people right now that gives us clues about who we should invest into or not, who we should develop or not, who should we give opportunities to and give more responsibility to, etc., and who shouldn't we? Because you will learn so much about people. You might also learn that there are some people you might not be that bothered about retaining. And equally, if you are going to recruit future people, what kind of characteristics do you want in them? Because I think one thing that many leaders are starting to appreciate right now is this is a challenge, absolutely, but it's not an isolated incident. We're likely to have more challenges off the back of it. The one trend that you can see throughout modern history is the challenges are coming thicker and faster. So if we just accept the fact that that is the trend, we didn't know that this was going to be COVID, but one of the things that, that I said a couple of years ago at a conference that we delivered all about how you navigate uncertainty, is that the one big trend is that the challenges are coming thicker and faster. The hurdles are getting higher. And if you accept it, you don't know whether it's COVID or a recession or Brexit or something else. You don't know what they are, but you can pretty much guarantee that they are coming harder and faster.
Yeah.
So if you accept that, what kind of people do we need?
Yeah.
And what kind of people do we not want?
Yeah.
If we're going to go through something similar, what kind of people would I want on board this ship? And it's getting your eye in around those sorts of things. I think that's incredibly valuable for leaders right now, because it will set the tone for your future recruitment and your deselection possibly, which will then underpin the kind of culture that you are creating. Because if you bring the wrong people in, you will dilute a great culture. If you bring the right people in there, you will enhance and enrich a great culture.
Yeah, I think that culture. People naturally build a culture, right? And good people flock to good people, and very quickly you can see this. I think there's a very interesting thing about, and you see this in football teams in particular, don't you? I guess any sort of sports team where you see a team that's got a very different culture, and then all of a sudden, with a different manager in there, that culture transforms. It's still the same people, but it's a very different set of results from that. Where's that come from? I mean, it might be exactly the same people with transformational results from it because they've been emancipated from the regime that they were in before. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about where you see how that comes into, and the role of the leader on there, because character's still the same in there, but the culture is very different with two sets of with two different managers.
Yeah. So one of the things that I work with leaders on often is how to create cultural drift, positive cultural drift, in an organization. Because the truth is that very few people in a culture are either always brilliant or always terrible. Yeah. In fact, statistically, in any culture, you've got a very small percentage, about 2.5%, who will always be brilliant no matter what culture they're in. You could put them in the worst culture in the world, they'll still be brilliant. They are the superstars. Equally, you've got a very small percentage of people who are always going to be nightmares. The understanding actually is that most people are what I call the malleable masses. Yeah. And these people will always be attracted towards the strongest. I think of these as gravitational cores. So you've got a positive core and a negative core. The positive core are people who are doing and saying great things, who are exhibiting all the behaviors that you want. They're living your values, all that sort of stuff. And the negative core are your blamers, your moaners, your cultural cancers. They're down the other end. Whichever's the strongest influence is the attractive core.
Yeah.
So, and with, if you imagine these like objects in space, mass is proportional to gravity. So the more people you've got doing and saying great things, the stronger that attractive force becomes. And you start to be able to pull people in from further away. And so as you add another person who's doing and saying great things, and then another one afterwards, and another one afterwards, it becomes almost like magnetically attractive to the malleable masses.
Yeah.
So actually, leaders, when they start to engineer this, can have a massive impact on the culture. If you let it drift, it will become whatever it becomes. And if you've got some people in there who are negative and a strong influence, that will become your culture.
Yeah.
And probably because you just didn't in any way intentionally or deliberately engineer the kind of culture that you want.
Yeah.
So
it's an interesting word. It's an interesting word you use there, isn't it? Engineer the culture, because it almost sounds Machiavellian and the puppeteer of where it goes. But I think there's such an important part to that, because engineering a culture to me is the fundamental of what this time. I think I've never worked harder about caring and looking and talking to people and just trying to make sure that everyone is happy. It's like having 30, 40, 50 kids all at one stage and just trying to make sure no one feels like they're not the favorite child. Mm-hmm. That's the stage. It's been a balancing act. But how do you see people sort of, I think for some people you'll hear engineering as a negative word there. How's it a positive for you?
Well, if you kind of think of culture like weather, there's never a period where there's no weather. The question is, what weather have you got?
Yeah.
And so you will always have a culture. The question is, have you got the one that you want or not?
Yeah.
And if you let it become whatever it becomes, then you're kind of sticking your finger in the air or flipping a coin or whatever and thinking, I hope we get a great culture here.
Yeah.
But who wants to hope they get a great culture? I mean, if you think about it, just if we go back to the principle of recruiting really great people who fit, that's a process of engineering your culture. You are deliberately trying to create a culture that's positive, one that's a rewarding culture to be part of. It's a team that people want to belong to. We do great stuff here. We all feel very fulfilled when we do it. We nothing, you never get plain sailing, but we do know that even when we hit challenges, we're likely to get through them because there's some great people here. We believe in what we're doing, etc., etc. So do we want that kind of culture, or do we want somewhere where actually we don't really want to turn up here? If we get a chance of taking a sickie, we'll take it, because quite frankly, our culture stinks. We never hit our targets. We're always getting an earful from the boss because we're always behind. Who wants to be in that kind of culture? And as well as being able to attract better people, because you create a culture that people want to be a part of, you also retain your very best people. Yeah. Because actually, if the culture slides, those superstars will decide that actually, I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
I'm going to find somewhere else to be. I don't want to be part of an organization where everybody's blaming, moaning and bitching and whatever. It's not where I want to be. So if you think about it, if you leave it to its own devices, you will get whatever you get. If you start to engineer it, if you start to genuinely sort of positively create a cultural drift and create the kind of culture that you want, then you will end up with something, I think, far better.
No, I agree with that. I think there's an interesting piece as well, isn't there, about the character and hiring and recruiting for character, because there is a danger around this as much as there's a positive. And the danger is you start hiring more of exactly the same person, and you lose the diversity of the team. And through diversity, obviously, more often than not, you get increased performance and people who play to each other's strengths. How do we avoid saying that this is the character that we're looking for, this is the type of person we're looking for, and it not becoming sort of identikit team of robots effectively.
Well, this is where we can differentiate personality from character. And for most teams, diversity of personality is critical. I mean, actually, for all teams, diversity of personality is critical. So this is where, I wouldn't want to recruit lots of people who are like me, because if they're like me, then we've got lots of weaknesses that we're not really covering for. Because
sounds like a team of legends to me, Simon.
If we had a team that were all like me, our analytical skills would be very low, and our eye dotting and T crossing wouldn't be great. But we'd come up with lots and lots of ideas, and
thank God for Caroline, huh?
So absolutely, thank God for Caroline. So we do need diversity of personality, but what we also want is we want some solid characteristics in people.
Yeah.
And character is different. So, whether I'm an eye dotter and a T crosser, or whether I'm an ideas generator, or whether I'm gold ribbon or whatever, that's at the level of personality. Character is asking, am I an honest one? Am I a courageous one? Am I a resilient one? And that's at the level of character, because to differentiate the two, I mean, both distinguish people on a mental level, but character also has a moral component.
Yeah.
This is where we ask the question, what would you do if you weren't being watched? If there was no comeback, what would you do then? Are you the kind of person who will do the right thing for the right reason, just simply because it's the right thing to do?
Yeah.
And it's not dependent on having a reward if you do and a consequence if you don't. This I think it partly is where motivation's sort of fallen apart for a lot of people.
Yeah.
If motivation's absolutely dependent on a reward if you do and a consequence if you don't, then as soon as that disappears, as soon as that dynamic disappears and people aren't being watched anymore, they'll revert back to character.
Yeah.
So if we've got people who have got the character, then absolutely we can have diversity in personality. And I was chatting to a guy, a football coach who I've worked with for many years, who's doing a piece of work at the moment on how you manage mavericks. And we were talking about the fact that they can be very, very different people. As long as our core values are solid, as long as we're absolutely solid on values and purpose, and we've got that character element right, we can be incredibly different people, and that's fine. We don't just get away with it; it becomes a positive.
Well, this is the fascinating. I can't remember if we've spoken about The Last Dance and on Netflix. You've watched the series now, right?
Yeah.
I think this was just such an interesting part of that, because for those you haven't watched the documentary on Netflix, The Last Dance is well worth a watch, charting the Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls. But you're looking at three Mavericks as the sort of key storyliners for this, managed by Phil Jackson, who was dealing with one of the most demanding and players of any generation, who was the superstar performer, who probably didn't become the most amenable teammate for everyone in there, who drove incredibly hard and created diversion from it. You've got another guy in Scottie Pippen, who was a maverick insofar as a great player, but felt he was being underpaid and basically shut up shop for a little while. And then Dennis Rodman, who on the other side of it was going off to Vegas halfway through seasons because he wanted a break and everything. And managing those Mavericks was one hell of a thing, but the culture was enormously powerful in that sort of stage, which drove everything around it and allowed Mavericks to happen, right?
Completely. And what they did very unusually is have a high percentage of Mavericks in a fairly small team.
Yeah.
Most teams can cope with one or two, but they've got to build enough structure around that if you've got to kind of accept with most Mavericks that they might be brilliant one day and terrible the next. Yeah. I was talking to this football coach about you've almost got to accept that on some days you'll be playing with 12 players and on other days you'll be playing with 10.
Yeah.
Because they could go missing. But if you've got a strong enough structure around that, you can cope with that. You've also got to give them enough creative freedom, usually, to be able to do whatever they want to do and not tie them to a rigid set of processes and disciplines, because they're not the kind of person that can do that usually. And you've got to be able to...
And even more relevant right now as well, right? With Mavericks who aren't controlled in the office are suddenly roaming free and wherever they may be doing their business from. It becomes even more Again, petrol on the flames is exactly the same situation, right?
That's right. But if you go back to the fundamentals of having the right character in there,
Yeah.
What will they do when nobody's watching? And what you want to know is that their values are aligned, the purpose is aligned, they really care about what we do and they want to do it really well. And once you've got that, you can carry the differences, because actually the differences are how they go about doing it usually.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a really interesting part there, which you mentioned. Look, character is what you do when no one's watching, and those guys were driven by a very clear desire to win the championship ring and be the very best at what they were doing. You only have to watch those episodes to realise it's so important to do that.
Mm.
There's a lot of people who don't have that championship ring at the end of every season in a sales team or in a tech team or a team that are looking to deliver things. I think there are certain teams that get that absolutely right and say, look, our technology is changing the world and creating financial services for good, et cetera, et cetera. Some people sort of miss that. Purpose is, I think, one of the most interesting things, because, as you know, I've sort of studied it for years now, high performing teams, and been probably second only to you in a fascination for what high performance is all about. One of the things I sort of still struggle on, if I'm honest, this sort of day, is really getting a purpose that's overreaching for everyone. And I think different people have certain different areas, and in sports it's very, very clear to me. In certain businesses, you can think Kevlar and NASA and stories about all of that sort of stuff. But creating that sort of genuine sense of purpose that everyone comes into and thinking, right, this is bigger than me, isn't an easy thing to do for a business. And to create that character, that means that people are fighting for it in remote teams, where they're fed up with life as a whole. I think has been really, really important and really, really interesting. And again, I've seen companies get that absolutely right, and some fail to a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so this is an understanding actually that has come to me fairly recently. I describe motivation as being pear-shaped. And by that, I mean, P stands for purpose, intrinsic purpose. So what we do is important. It has a contribution to the world, makes a positive impact on the world, makes a difference. E is that we enjoy being part of this team and what we do. A is ambition and achievement, and R is recognition and reward. And knowing how people are motivated, over the years, I've asked the questions a lot, what motivates your people? Ask business leaders, what motivates your people? I've asked the people, what motivates you? And all of the answers seem to fall into these four. They're either purpose related, they're ambition related and achievement related, they're enjoyment related, which is kind of the social bit, and I'm being challenged and all the rest of it, and also reward and recognition. Very few people are only one or the other. It's a little bit like personality types. We're all a blend of all the personality types, but in different proportions. If we understand this as business leaders, what we can actually do is make sure we continually tick all four boxes.
Yeah.
And when we do, we create something very powerful, because the global understanding is what we do here is important. We're bloody good at this. In fact, we might even be the best at it. We really enjoy doing it and enjoy the challenge and enjoy the team that we do it with, et cetera, et cetera. And when we do that, we get really well rewarded.
Yeah.
And you kind of come to the point of saying, what more would we need? If we had those, what more would we need? If we created that, would we have a place that people were really proud to belong to? And they thought, this is special. Being part of this is something special.
Yeah.
And would it matter what industry we were in if we could create that? Whether we were a football team, a recruitment organization, or a fintech team, or whatever, would it make any difference? And my experience tells me that whether you're a Formula One pit crew, or a surgical team, or a team in a Michelin star kitchen, or whatever, it doesn't really matter. These are, again, fundamental ingredients that we can start to, as leaders, start to weave into the motivational fabric of our organization.
I don't think I've ever heard that as clinically and brilliantly put as that in all my time of working with you, Simon. That was absolutely fantastic. I think it's so important to have that, and it's suddenly become very simple when you say it like that, to create that sort of sense of belonging. You don't have to be saving lives or putting people on the moon to do that sort of stuff. Purpose comes from around that, and achieving that, and sort of being able to push the right buttons for the right people and continuously communicate that suddenly changes the game, right? And when people know where they're heading, they know they've got that sort of sense of purpose, they're doing it with good people who they care about. All of a sudden, you've got something there which becomes really, really compelling and sees you through the tough times. And there's going to be no tougher times than this for a lot of businesses and a lot of people. And having that sort of genuine North Star to it, I think is incredibly important. It seems like we've been talking for 2 minutes, and all of a sudden I notice how quickly we've gone through time. This is definitely one that's going to need some further follow-up episodes. But for now, Simon, it's been utterly pleasurable as always having you on the show and talking to you. The insight has been spectacular as always. I know people, and anyone who's watching that and thinking, right, okay, I've got this issue in my team at the moment, or I want to take my team to the next level, need to be able to get in touch with you. I know Be World Class is and Be World Class TV has been taking off left, right, and centre at the moment for it. Tell us a little bit about how people can get in touch with you and who should be talking to you at the moment, how you can add value.
Yeah, so hopefully you should be able to find me fairly easily by typing Simon Hartley and Be World Class into Google. It should bring up the website. And if you find the website and you put Simon @ in front of the web address, then you'll find me. Hopefully you find me on LinkedIn fairly quickly as well. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in how you start to embed this into your teams, it definitely would be worth taking a look at Be World Class TV, which is just www.beworldclass.tv. All of those you should be able to find me fairly easily, and I'm very open to just picking up a conversation. So drop me a line and we'll pick up a conversation.
Well, I'll give you. I won't embarrass you or make you too big-headed at the end of it, but you've been so important to our business over the years. And the books. I've read all of your books, and I love every single one of them. And I think that they're a classic read. So anyone who's got a genuine desire to want to see their team improve and get better and understand that sort of performance and the journey to high performance, there is no one better in the world to speak to than Mr. Simon Hartley. It has been an utter pleasure doing just that with you today. Thank you for sharing the wisdom, Simon, and joining us on Fintech Focus TV. Thank you all for watching as well, and we'll see you soon. Simon, thanks ever so much.
Cheers. See you soon. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Cheers, mate.